This is Catherine Neal, and in this video we're going to talk about moral philosophy. We're going to include some study of moral philosophy and ethical theories as a tool for helping us better understand how we make decisions about right or wrong, how we go about analyzing an ethical dilemma, and to help us better understand how others may analyze a situation differently than we do and reach different conclusions about right or wrong. So we're going to take a look at these moral philosophies and theories and help them broaden our thoughts about how we make decisions about right or wrong. Thomas Hobbes, a famous philosopher, said, "Moral philosophy is nothing else but the science of what is good and evil in conversation and society of mankind. Good and evil are names that signify our appetites and aversions, which in different tempers, customs, and doctrines of men are different." For most people, we began very early in our lives learning the difference between right or wrong. We are influenced by those around us. For most of us, the first influences that we have come from our parents or family, the people that we're around the most. As we grow older and are exposed to more people, we can be influenced by friends, teachers, religious leaders, and others that we have contact with that help us develop our own values and methods of determining the difference between right and wrong. So, what is moral philosophy? The branch of philosophy that contemplates what is right and what is wrong. Ethical theories and moral philosophies are a means for applying logic and analysis to ethical dilemmas. Again, a tool to help us think through difficult situations where we must make a judgment about right and wrong. In a business organization, individuals rely on their personal moral philosophies, their personal values, to make decisions. We don't turn off who we are when we walk through the door of a business organization, or if we're working from home, we don't change who we are, so we're still going to evaluate right or wrong the same. Making those decisions inside a business organization can be more complex than in our individual lives, in that we are required to work with others to make decisions in conjunction with the thoughts and preferences and authority of other people around us. Remember the parable of the sadhu, the group that ran into the sadhu, and they had varying reactions to this ethical dilemma that had been thrust upon them, and making a decision in a group can be quite complex when you're trying to be consistent and true to your own values and yet take into account the personal values and ethics of the people around you. And this can lead to disagreement. Now, disagreement is not necessarily bad. It can lead to good decisions where you've made greater considerations than you would individually. But conflict can also lead to difficulties in a business organization. I've categorized moral philosophies into three categories, and this is how we're going to walk through these and think about each one individually. The three categories are those theories based on consequences. The second category are those theories based on rights, duties, and principles. So theories based on consequences are called teleological ethics. Those theories based on rights, duties, and principles are called deontological ethics. And the third category are those theories based on integrity and character, sometimes called virtue ethics. So let's start into the first category and look at some moral philosophies based on consequences. The first theory I want us to think about is utilitarian theory. There is a vast amount of information available about utilitarian theory, so if you're interested or are looking for a more in-depth understanding of this theory, you can go find much material, reading material, videos that can help you better understand this theory. The two philosophers best known for writing about utilitarian theory are John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. Utilitarian theory is that which defines right or acceptable behavior as that which provides the greatest good to the greatest number of people. So if you're faced with a dilemma, you make the right decision by choosing what provides the greatest good to the greatest number of people. This is also called the greatest happiness principle. How can you provide the greatest happiness to the most people? A utilitarian will make decisions that result in the greatest utility, the greatest benefit for those affected by the decision. So reflect back on the trolley problem, where you have the option of pulling a lever, saving 5 people at the expense of killing 1 person on the other track. What would a utilitarian do in that situation? Well, it appears that a utilitarian, to provide the greatest good to the greatest number of people, would pull the lever, save the 5 people on the track at the cost of losing the single person on the other track. 5 versus 1. So you would make the decision to pull the lever. Utilitarian theory in application requires a cost-benefit analysis, comparing all the alternatives and choosing the one that results in the greatest benefit to the most people. So this is a balancing effort where you're hoping to minimize the harms that result from a decision as you maximize the benefit. One of the difficulties of using a cost-benefit analysis to make decisions about right or wrong and applying the utilitarian theory is that often the measurements, the quantification is quite difficult, if not impossible. Now, when we're talking about using this theory in a business environment, in business we measure most things in dollar amounts. How much are we saving? How much are we spending? How do we measure in business? And usually it's in dollars. It is difficult often in reality to place a dollar amount on things. Some things are really difficult to quantify. For example, what if I offered you today the opportunity to have $1 million in cash if you let me cut off the pinky finger of your non-dominant hand? Would you take that deal? Would you let me cut off your pinky finger for $1 million? Some of you would say, yes, I would happily do that. I'll give you my pinky finger for $1 million. Others of you say, no, there's no amount of money that I would accept for a body part. I'm not willing to lose part of my anatomy for any amount of money. So we often can't reach agreement on the value of the things we're trying to quantify in a cost-benefit analysis. As an attorney, I had many cases where I was required to quantify the damage to an individual due to someone's negligence, an accident. So for example, what if someone suffered brain damage and had deficits due to the brain damage, an inability to read, an inability to remember, short-term memory problems. If you're required to place a dollar amount on those losses, on those damages, how do you do that? How much is your short-term memory worth to you? How much is your ability to read worth to you? These things are really difficult to quantify. And again, this is what makes using the utilitarian theory difficult in reality, when we have to place dollar amounts or quantify the value of things that are really nearly impossible to quantify or to get people to agree on the value of. In a business scenario, for example, imagine that an automobile manufacturer learns that there is a defect in the vehicles that they're manufacturing that could lead to the death of people riding in those vehicles. And they can do a calculation that says X number of people are likely to be killed or injured because of this defect, and the cost of that to us would be $100 million. We would get sued by the survivors or the families of those who are injured, and it's going to cost the company over time $100 million, versus doing a recall today that's going to cost us $250 million. What's the right thing to do? Do we do the recall that costs us 2.5 times more than the calculated damage if we do nothing and people are killed or injured because of the defect in our vehicle? Is that a fair and ethical way to value the lives that are impacted by the defect? Do you do the recall even though it costs more? What's the right thing to do there? Well, hopefully you would think, I don't want to be the person who gets killed or injured because of the defect in this vehicle, so I think the right thing to do is for the company to recall these vehicles, even though it costs them more. So you can see the difficulty with application of the utilitarian theory and having to quantify something that is nearly impossible to accurately quantify. Another moral philosophy or theory that falls into the category of those based on consequences is the ethical egoism theory. This is a theory that defines right or acceptable behavior in terms of its consequences for the individual. Ethical egoists believe they should make decisions that maximize their own self-interest. What's in it for me? What's best for me? Now, initially we may have a negative reaction to thinking that someone who makes decisions in their own self-interest are selfish, are self-centered, are not compassionate people who think of others. But in fact, we all make self-interested decisions every day, don't we? You get up and go to work in your own best interest. You take this class in your own self-interest, doing things that are best for you. So it's not necessarily a negative thing unless taken to the extreme where you are so self-interested that you look out for yourself at the expense of others. Also, it is sometimes easy to believe that people are always hoping to benefit themselves financially more than anything else. But self-interest can be things more than just money, more than just financial interests. People are interested in physical well-being. Lots of people are motivated by power. What can they do to get themselves more power in the world? Many people are motivated by pleasure. What can I do? What decisions can I make that get me more pleasure? Have you ever spent a weekend binging on something on Netflix. That would be a self-interested decision that you're doing for yourself to increase the amount of pleasure in your life. Some people are motivated by fame, a satisfying career, a good family life. Some people are motivated by money, and they make all their decisions hoping to benefit themselves financially. So keep in mind that people have different interests that drive them in making self-interested decisions. A few philosophers that wrote in this area: Ayn Rand, who you may be familiar with as an author. A couple of famous books that she's written are Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. Rand said the world would be a better place if we did not feel guilty about the choices we make and simply acknowledge that we all act in our own best interest. And she believed that order in society would be maintained by laws that protect us from harming each other as we pursue our individual interests. So we need laws in place that prevent us from hurting others as we pursue our own interest. So, for example, you own property and you're interested in having lots of chickens, laying eggs for you. And so over time you accumulate dozens of chickens. What if your neighbors don't like having dozens of chickens right next door to them? How does the neighbor who wants chickens square that with the neighbor who doesn't want to live next door to chickens? So there may be laws in place, zoning laws, that protect neighbors from having chickens right next door to them. Another philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, believed, like Ayn Rand believed, that self-interest is central consideration in human decision-making. Hobbes had a little more extreme view than Ayn Rand, though. He cautioned of the effects of self-interest on social and political order. He believed that individual self-interest can lead to danger and civil conflict. He believed that there will be chaos if we do not have laws in place to control the drive of self-interest, that individuals will trample the rights of others in order to get what they want, and that you need strong government power to control individual egoism. I think a good example of what Hobbes talked about can be seen in a tragedy that happened in Cincinnati in 1979. The band The Who was in Cincinnati for a concert, and back in the 70s, almost all concerts sold tickets based on festival seating or general admission seating, which means that you bought a ticket that did not assign you to a particular seat, that all seats in the venue were first come, first served. So individuals would get to the venue early to get in the doors first, because the first people to the best seats got to sit in those seats. And that was the case with the Who concert in Cincinnati in 1979. Tickets were sold as general admission or festival seating. People lined up outside of what was then called the Riverfront Coliseum, the venue. And when the people in the venue began to open doors, those waiting in line rushed the doors, trying to be the first inside to get to the best seats, and it resulted in a tragedy.
Fans showed up early for the show at Riverfront Coliseum because they were holding general admission tickets.
That causes the people to press forward to get a seat or a location on the floor.
Get in and find the best place you can, and that may have had something to do with the fact that when the doors to the Coliseum opened at around 7:30 last evening, Thousands of people were gathered waiting to get into the show. Besides, there weren't enough people to take tickets when 2 doors finally were open.
And to push against the doors and kick them trying to get in.
I could not comprehend why there weren't opening more doors.
Several doors were broken open.
Another door opened next to the one that was already open. A few moments later, it was closed.
And that's when the problem developed. People pushing toward the doors.
I was soaked head to foot and my clothes were ragged.
Panic and eventually death.
People were sobbing all around. Some people were climbing up the wall above the unopened doors.
11 people died. From all reports, literally trampled to death in a stampede toward the doors.
They would stand on the steel railings, jump up and get a grip at the top of the wall, do a half chin up and move left until they reached the open door.
I was there, but I can't explain what happened Monday night.
Others were pleading also to open the doors, but the police inside were very tough and refused to listen.
And at 7:54, we found the first bodies laying on the ground some 15 feet from the front doors.
The bodies appear to have died of trauma.
For anyone that fell to the ground, there was no way to get up. The crowd just walked over.
There was some evidence of footprint-like entries.
They all just started to push. It was just one massive wave of pushing.
There were multiple contusions.
You could actually see the kids, they push and they kind of fall back and push again.
I caught my breath. I pleaded with a young woman police officer to open the doors, that there were people down out there.
Any that might have fallen in the front were just trampled.
The deaths were attributed to the asphyxiation.
The crowd surged forward, people fell, they panicked, and 11 ended up dead.
I hung my head in frustration as I received an answer from the woman police officer. Where can they go? As she pointed to the turnstiles where there were very few ticket takers.
Well, for about the last 3 days, we received flowers from the WHO a couple days ago. And have heard them indicate that they felt somewhat responsible for this just because of the nature of their concerts.
We know it was our fault, and it's our responsibility. And I'm not going to get into any deep conversations with any police chiefs, fire marshals, federal people or whatever. I mean, or even any mums and dads. You know, I'm a father. I've got 2 young kids.
We feel that they have no responsibility for what happened.
There's no words to say what I feel. I'm a parent as well. I've got a boy of 15 and 2 little girls. And I can just say I'm sorry for what's happened, you know.
There's no one reason for this happening.
There were 2 other girls from Finneytown, Jacqueline Eckerly and Karen Morrison, that had gone down to the Coliseum very, very early that day. Karen was 15 years old, Jackie was 16.
It's a series of events, and the total facts are not going to be known until all the information is released.
For Karen, it was her first concert that she had ever gone to. They had decided to go down real early because they wanted to avoid the crowd and they wanted to get a good seat. So they were really, very, very close to the doors.
Nobody cares more than the bands about it, I assure you. But that part of it is always totally out of our control, isn't it?
My brother who was killed loved the band. He was just a 100% clean kid that happened to like to play the guitar and, happened to like rock and roll.
There's no way it's going to stop us. I mean, we'll go on.
He was looking forward to this concert, more than anything I can remember.
It was just, we lost our drummer last year, and now we've lost another 11 fans. I mean, we'll go on for them, So rock and roll, it's got nothing to do with rock and roll. It's got to do with just the way society is generally now. I mean, those kind of things are going to happen in 20th century society.
11 kids have been killed.
So this is a good example of what Hobbes wrote about when he talked about ethical egoism, when self-interest is out of control and disregards the rights of others, the interests of others. So it's an extreme view. As we look at the case studies later in this class, and you're analyzing the decision-making and action of business leaders, think about whether ethical egoism was at least in part what drove them to make bad decisions, unethical decisions? Were they looking at themselves at the expense of others? Another philosopher who wrote about ethical egoism is Adam Smith, an economist as well as philosopher, who also believed that individuals are self-interested, but his view of self-interest was not as extreme as what was feared by Ayn Rand and Thomas Hobbes. He believed that humans are rational and had a view for long-term self-interest more than immediate gratification. This is sometimes called enlightened egoism. Enlightened egoists have a long-range perspective that allows for the well-being of others, although always with their own self-interest in mind. For example, an enlightened egoist might call management's attention to a co-worker who is cheating customers, not motivated by pure concern for customers, but because she's concerned for the long-range health of the company and her own continued employment. Another theory based on consequence is moral relativism. This is where determination of right and wrong is subjective, depending on the circumstances. Relativists look to themselves and to those around them and look to the particular circumstances to determine what is right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable, ethical or unethical, sometimes called time and place ethics. If you're a moral relativist, there are no absolute rules. Right or wrong depends on the circumstances. Think about these examples. If we have an accepted rule that stealing is wrong, are all of these circumstances equally wrong? Anna steals food from a store to feed her hungry baby. She's desperate and has no other way to feed him. Bob takes food from a store because he has a mental illness that manifests in compulsive stealing. And Cindy steals food from a store because it's easy to do and because if she doesn't buy food, she can spend her money on a pedicure. Are Anna, Bob, and Cindy all equally wrong? If we have a rule that stealing is wrong, are they all wrong? Or is the degree of wrongness subjective, dependent on the circumstances? That's moral relativism. The next category of theories are those based on rights, duties, and principles, not on consequences. The first one, divine command theory, is when individuals resolve ethical dilemmas based on religious beliefs. They rely on tenets of faith to guide them in making decisions about right or wrong. Included in this theory is natural law, which says there are certain rights and conduct controlled by God, and no matter what a society or government does, those rights and law remain supreme, so that there's a greater law than the law created by man or created by a society. An example of this we can find in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident meaning it's natural. No one needs to tell you that because it's a natural law. That all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable, which means they can't be taken from you. A government can't take them from you. Society can't take them from you. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's an example of natural law. The next theory in this second category is called the categorical imperative. And again, like these other theories, if you're interested, if you would like more information, there's volumes written about the categorical imperative. If you want to go and search and read more, there's plenty of information available. The primary philosopher known for the categorical imperative is a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. Under the categorical imperative, you make decisions about right and wrong as if your decision creates a universal rule for everyone else. You do what you believe to be right, what you would want anyone else to do in the same circumstances. So individuals should evaluate their actions in light of the consequences that would follow if everyone in society acted the same way. You must ask yourself if you're comfortable living with the standards that you establish. So you don't make exceptions for yourself. You behave in a way that you would want everyone to behave. Another theory in this second category of theories is the veil of ignorance, which is part of what a greater theory known as the theory of justice. We're just going to take a narrow look at the veil of ignorance, and that how it helps us make decisions about right or wrong, or how other people make decisions about right or wrong. And the veil of ignorance is what rules would you impose if you had no idea how those rules are going to impact you at the time that you're creating the rule. So you're charged with creating a rule, but you don't know how that rule is going to impact you personally at the time that you create it. And here's a very simple commercial for Jif peanut butter, I think, that helps explain the veil of ignorance.
Mom, it's the last slice.
Well, then let's share. We'll cut it in half.
His half can't be bigger than mine.
All right. I'll tell you what. Jake gets to cut.
Yes.
But Cody gets to choose.
Nice.
Jif uses the finest peanuts to make a rich, nuttier peanut butter.
I got a pretty big half.
In that commercial, if you are the person who gets to cut the piece of bread and you don't know which half you're going to get, which piece you're going to get of the two, where are you going to cut it? The veil of ignorance says you'll cut it right down the middle, because you will tend to be more fair if you don't know how you're going to personally be impacted by your decision. And that's the veil of ignorance. Finally, our third category are theories and philosophies based on integrity and character. And I want to look at what are called virtue ethics, an acquired or learned set of virtues used to make decisions. Under this theory, espoused by Aristotle and Plato, becoming an ethical decision maker is a skill that must be learned and can be learned. So under this theory, we are all charged with becoming people of better character, of developing character traits that make us ethical decision makers. For example, a person who has developed the character trait of honesty will be disposed to tell the truth because it's considered to that person, based on his social development, the right and comfortable things to do. Virtue ethics means doing what a person with good moral character would do. So you can learn to be ethical, you can learn to be moral, and you can practice those character traits to be a better person. So considering all the theories that we've looked at through this video, I want you to consider this very complex ethical dilemma. A terrorist who's believed to possess detailed knowledge of planned attacks on U.S. citizens is captured but unwilling to talk. Should aggressive interrogation techniques that are questionably considered torture by some people, such as waterboarding, be used on the terrorist? What would a utilitarian do? The greatest good for the greatest number of people. What would a virtue ethicist do? Someone who is of good moral character. What would the categorical imperative guide you to do? Give that some thought. Would the outcomes and the decisions about right or wrong be different depending on the theory that you're applying?